So let's turn to Canada because the new Prime Minister is expected to announce a snap election. He has been visiting the country's Governor-General and he has just come out, so let's cross over live now.
2 months ago, I was at a rink in Edmonton where I'd learned to play hockey. And that's about as far as you can get from the grandeur of Rideau Hall. And I was there because I was putting up my hand to run for the leadership of the Liberal Party of Canada. And I was doing that because I knew our country needed to take action. We needed to act to fix our economy. We needed to act to fight the Americans. We needed to act to deal with Donald Trump's tariffs. Il y a 9 jours, notre nouveau gouvernement a prêté serment et nous sommes immédiatement passés à l'action. Cette semaine, nous avons conclu un nouvel accord portant sur la défense nationale avec l'Australie pour protéger le Canada. Nous avons renforcé nos relations en matière de sécurité avec la France et le Royaume-Uni pour protéger les Canadiens et les Canadiennes. Nous avons lancé des discussions sur de nouveaux accords commerciaux.
So just as Mark Carney there speaking in French, of course, dual languages in Canada, just explaining to you, the audience, that Mark Carney is holding that media conference. He's about to announce a snap election.
To end the division that it was creating amongst Canadians, because we are stronger together. We reversed the increase in the capital gains tax so that builders are encouraged to take risks and be rewarded when they succeed. When I met with the premiers in Ottawa on Friday, we agreed to eliminate barriers to trade and mobility inside our country. And the federal government is leading by committing to legislate the end of all federal barriers to interprovincial trade by July 1st. Together, we will push to create one Canadian economy by Canada Day, because we are stronger together. This past week, we acted to protect workers, using the proceeds of our retaliatory tariffs against America's unjustified trade actions. We acted to unlock major infrastructure projects and get them moving rapidly, including clean and conventional energy, critical minerals, and new trade corridors with reliable trading partners. We acted to create new supports for farmers and businesses during this trade war. We expanded dental care for millions of more Canadians. And we took all of these actions and more to create the foundation to build a stronger Canada. There is so much more to do to secure Canada, to invest in Canada, to build Canada, to unite Canada. That's why I'm asking for a strong, positive mandate from my fellow Canadians. I've just requested that the Governor-General dissolve Parliament and call an election for April 28th. And she has agreed. We are facing the most significant crisis of our lifetimes because of President Trump's unjustified trade actions and his threats to our sovereignty. Our response must be to build a strong economy and a more secure Canada. President Trump claims that Canada isn't a real country. He wants to break us so America can own us. We will not let that happen. We're over the shock of the betrayal, but we should never forget the lessons. We have to look out for ourselves. We have to look out for each other. Nous savons que nous devons veiller les unes sur les autres.
So incredibly strong words there from Mark Carney. We're facing the most significant crisis in our lifetimes because of President Trump, addressing directly the tariffs that President Trump has imposed on Canada, and also this concept that President Trump sees Canada as America's 51st state. Let's listen back in.
We can give ourselves more than any foreign government can take away. And the best way we can deal with this crisis is to build our strength here at home and help people who will be hit hardest by these tariffs. That's the right thing to do. That's the fair thing to do. That's the Canadian thing to do. That's what makes us strong. As part of that strategy, today I'm proposing a middle-class tax cut to help all working Canadians get ahead. We will cut the lowest income tax bracket by 1 percentage point for a middle-class tax cut that will benefit a two-income family by up to $825 a year. Aujourd'hui, je propose de réduire les impôts pour la classe moyenne pour aider.
So Mark Carney there announcing that he is calling the snap election in Canada for the 28th of April. He wants a strong mandate. Leader of the Liberal Party, he wants to increase the strength of that party.
I'm asking Canadians for a strong, positive mandate to deal with President Trump and to build a new Canadian economy that works for everyone. Because I know we need change. Big change. Positive change. You see, my generation was fortunate. For us, there were more opportunities and life was more affordable. You had to work hard, but you could get ahead. That was the bargain. But for the generations that have followed, they're working just as hard or even harder than we did. But they're struggling to pay the rent, to put groceries on the table, and to save for their kids' educations. J'ai passé toute ma carrière à comprendre comment le monde fonctionne et comment il pourrait.
So Mark Carney there calling that snap election and really not mincing his words, being very, very critical about Donald Trump, saying that he wants to break us, as in the Canadian country, the nation, so that America can own us. He's saying that the country is facing the most significant crises in our lifetimes and laying the blame for that at Donald Trump's feet.
Je veux que les Canadiens et les Canadiennes comprennent que nous avons tout ce dont nous avons besoin.
So 28th of April is when Canadians go to the polls, and Mark Carney will be hopeful that his Liberal Party will get a stronger mandate. Of course, the main opposition, the Conservative Party, will be hoping that they will pick up votes, but they were ahead somewhat in the polls when Justin Trudeau was the leader of the Liberal Party. That a big bounce in the polls for the Liberals since Mark Carney took over.
When you've never fixed anything. It's easy to be negative about everything when you've never built anything, when you've never had to make a payroll. But negative slogans aren't solutions. Anger isn't action. Division isn't strength. Negativity won't win a trade war. Negativity won't pay the rent or the mortgage. Negativity won't bring down the price of groceries. And negativity won't make Canada strong. Nous avons vu où la négativité et la division ont mené les États-Unis. Nous sommes plus forts quand nous sommes unis. Ils vont s'affaiblir parce qu'ils ne le sont plus. Alors, unissons-nous en cette période de crise. I love Canada. Our country has given me everything. I stood up in Edmonton 2 months ago, and I'm standing here today because I want to give it all back to Canada. So that every Canadian kid, whether they're growing up in Nanaimo or Montreal or St. John or Scarborough or Inuvik, has the same opportunities that I had, the same hope, the same confidence in a brighter future. It's time for all of us to come together and be strong. So I'm asking for your vote so we can be Canada strong. Canada fort. Vive le Canada. And with that, I'd be pleased to take your questions.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We'll begin our question period. We'll take 15 minutes of question, one follow-up. Merci. On va prendre 15 minutes de questions, une question et une question de suivi. Première question.
Good afternoon, Tonda McCharles with the Toronto Star. Sir, why are you throwing the country into an election in the middle of a tariff war? And if you think it's so necessary now, then why not make it longer so Canadians can really test drive you to see if you represent the change you claim to represent?
Well, a couple of things, Tonda. First is that we have put in place a tremendous amount of change in the 9 days that I have been Prime Minister. That includes changes to taxes, including the announcement today of a middle-class tax cut. But very importantly, we put in place protections for workers. So we made a commitment right from the start that we would use all revenues from retaliatory tariffs to protect our workers, and we put in place changes to the EI system in order to do that. I note that Mr. Poilievre has taken that money and said he will use it for a tax cut. Doesn't care about workers being in place. We put in place protections for businesses through this period. We have shown the scale of our ambition in terms of creating what Canadians have asked for, and I've heard this time and time again across this great country. Canadians want one Canadian economy, not 13. They want us to break down those barriers. So we brought together the First Ministers, the Premiers of the provinces. We hammered out a consensus about achieving that. We're picking up on the model that Nova Scotia and others have put in place. We're making a commitment at the federal level to legislate the removal of all these barriers by Canada Day, so we can have free trade by Canada Day. So we've done a lot. I could go on, but we've done a lot in the 9 days to put in place many of the foundations. But what's important is that the government has a mandate from the Canadian people to finish the job, of building that Canadian economy, to finish the job of diversifying our trading partners, and to have a strong mandate to stand up to Donald Trump and the Americans and negotiate the best deal for Canadians. And that's what I will do.
After that meeting Friday night, you said you linked Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives to Elon Musk and Donald Trump's approach to cutting taxes, regulations, foreign aid. Mr. Poilievre's just staked out his own platform pitch to Canadians right now, today saying that he will stand up to Trump, that a Liberal's still just a Liberal. So on what basis can you fairly compare the Canadian Conservatives to Trump-style Republican Conservatives?
Well, first, the comparisons are quite easy. You look at the language mirrors, and the track record of language stretches back over years. It's not a recent phenomenon, so straight from the language, number one. Secondly, from the intention. So Elon Musk stands up and says, and the Trump administration eliminates foreign aid. Within a few days, Pierre Poilievre flies in and out of Nunavut and says, I'm going to eliminate foreign aid. By the way, doesn't talk to the Premier, doesn't talk to local Indigenous leaders while he's there, not our approach, obviously. So a series of words plus proposals which are uncannily familiar with the proposals of the Trump administration. Very different from our approach, very different from an approach for example, to building a housing market, both offering much greater supply, very different from our approach. I'll give you one last example, because I know there's a long lineup of questions. Today, we announced that we are going to expand dental care. Now, the dental care program that was put in place several months ago now serves 1.8 million Canadians. 1.8 million Canadians have received dental care under this program. These are people who could not afford dental care previously. Pierre Poilievre pretends they don't exist. We've just expanded the potential pool by another 4.5 million Canadians who also are in that situation. That is a very different approach to Canada. That's a Canada that brings Canadians together, protects all, and that's the Canada we're offering.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Ashley Burke, CBC News. You've repealed the capital gains tax changes, and you're promising this middle-class tax cut, but you're also making new spending commitments. So how do you plan to pay for that, and what kind of cuts will you have to make to keep up with your promise of a deficit below 1% of GDP?
Well, a couple of things. One is that we are looking at driving efficiency in government, in other words, productivity in government, by flipping around the approach to government, which is to concentrate on the outcomes.
So as Mark Carney there going into quite domestic policies and what he wants to do, and no doubt we'll get much more details as Canada goes into full campaign mode ahead of during that election campaign. We now know that the election date, this snap election date, is the 28th of April. We have a number of guests just to dissect this a little bit further. I'm very pleased to say we are joined by Mark Carney, who's a correspondent for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. Mark from CBC, welcome to the BBC. Lovely to speak to you. Just in terms of what we're seeing today, arguably it's not such a surprise that Mark Carney is calling this snap election. He will have his work cut out, though, in making Canadians get to know him.
He certainly will. And yeah, this is no surprise. In fact, we've joked around here in the newsroom at CBC that this is essentially the worst kept secret in Canadian politics at this point. Everyone kind of knew it was happening this weekend, and everyone knew that an election was coming in the springtime. But he definitely will have his work cut out for him. There are several aggregated public opinion polls that have been done by pollsters across this country who have shown that in a matter of mere weeks to months, the Liberal Party under Mark Carney, their new leader, has pulled ahead of Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party, which at one point had a strong lead in these polls, certainly. But 5 weeks in politics is an eternity. And a lot can change in 5 weeks, as it did to get us to this point. So certainly you can tell by the things that he did in his 9 days as Prime Minister and the things that he's promising to do if he gets elected Prime Minister again on April 28th, that Mark Carney knows, as you mentioned, Tasha, he certainly has his work cut out for him. He has a lot to do. There are a lot of people who, while they may like the Liberal Party, do not necessarily trust Mark Carney because he is a Prime Minister who was not a sitting member of Parliament to begin with. He found what many seem to feel was a loophole in getting into the Liberal leadership race and becoming Prime Minister that way. So he has to prove that he is Prime Minister worthy. He has to prove that essentially that he can do this the right way. And as he has mentioned several times, and this has sort of become the main plank for all the parties now in our upcoming election, he has to prove that he can stand up to Donald Trump. Canadians are a little bit frightened. They're worried. There are these incoming tariffs at the start of April. There are open threats to our sovereignty coming from the U.S. president. So people are very concerned, and they feel as though, many Canadians feel as though we're currently on a rudderless ship. We have a Prime Minister who stepped down. Our Parliament was already prorogued, has been prorogued since the start of the new year. And no one really knows where we go from here. So the country wants strong leadership.
Mark, on that point that he wasn't elected, I did actually, and we will bring Professor Lander in, who has been with us throughout all of this press conference by Mark Carney. But Mark, just that idea that he wasn't elected, Professor Lander corrected me in saying that, well, he actually did go through an election for the leadership. So he's been through a little bit of the politics and personally has a mandate by being elected as the leader of the Liberal Party. But you still feel that there's still a little bit of ambiguity as to whether that was the right way to do it?
It's certainly not illegal in any way. But the thing is that, yes, he was elected by members of the Liberal Party. However, that is not a poll of the wider Canadian public. That is a poll specifically of members of the Liberal Party, card-carrying, membership-paying members of the Liberal Party. And they elected their leader. And yes, in Canada, we do not elect prime ministers. We vote for our individual MPs. Our system is essentially modeled after your Westminster system, Tasha. But because he has not been elected Prime Minister by the wider Canadian public, there is a lot of people who just feel a little bit iffy about him and are not quite sure. And I think many people will be grateful for the opportunity to have a full, wide federal election. It's not something that people necessarily look forward to most times, most years, but I think this time around, people will very much look forward to having that wide, for lack of a better term, public opinion poll here.
Fascinating. So, Mark, you're going to be busy during that election time. Mark Carney, during the campaigning correspondent for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, CBC. Thank you very much. So let's bring in our previous guest, Professor Moshe Landa, Senior Economist at Concordia University in Montreal. Thank you so much for staying with us as we watch Mark Carney coming out there. He was really strong, wasn't he? He was saying Canada's facing the most significant crisis of our lifetime. He said that America wants to break Canada so that they can own us. Are you surprised by the strength of his words?
No, he's had 9 days to write that speech. So he's going to have to come out of the box. As Mark was just saying before you brought me back in, he hasn't faced the Canadian public yet in an elected office. So if this is going to be the first time that Canadians are hearing him speak beyond just his role as the previous governor of the Bank of Canada, then you can't come out and mince words. You can't say, let's hope that somewhere over the next 5 weeks we figure out what it is that we want to do. Here's our plan. Here's what we're going to do. Here's the threat we see, and here's how we're going to address it. I think he did a very good job. His French was a little iffy, but I think that's forgivable.
I have to say, our producer is French, and he was, yes, they raised a little bit of an eyebrow on terms of the pronunciation. But of course, we know that Canada is a bilingual nation. Just in terms of how he was perceived in Canada as the head of the Bank of Canada, the central bank of the country, was he popular?
You know, I don't know if the Bank of Canada governors have any sort of popularity or Q rating. I often ask my students, does anybody know who the current Bank of Canada governor is? And I get blank looks. And sometimes I even have to remind myself what the current governor looks like. When I see him on TV, I'm like, oh, right, that's him. It's an extremely powerful position. It's independent of the government. They have a mandate to keep inflation between 1% and 3%. Other than a couple of years after COVID, they've been extremely successful going back to the early 1990s. But the fact is that they're unelected. And other than appearing every 6 or 7 weeks to give a speech about what they're going to do with interest rates, they're mostly touring among the business leaders of Canada and giving speeches there, but it doesn't really resonate with the Canadian public. So I'm not sure that anybody's going to really remember him other than just, yeah, I seem to recall he did a good job.
So he needs to effectively reintroduce himself, and especially in this kind of political framework in his role as the leader of the Liberal Party. Just technically then, what happens? We heard there from our correspondent, our colleague at CBC rather, describing that your system, the Canadian system, mirrors the UK system. Of course, the King Charles is the head of state in Canada.
Absolutely. So we have about 340 some odd ridings, similar to what you would have in the UK, just not as many because we don't have as many people. Everybody is going to vote for who they want to be their member of parliament. And so the Liberals, the Conservatives, and the New Democratic Party, which would kind of be similar to your Lib Dems, a little bit left of center, but maybe not with the pro-marketry that has its history. It's maybe a little more of our Socialist Party, are going to have representatives in every riding. There's a separatist movement in Quebec that's probably going to offer up some candidates as well. And at the end of the day, it's whoever the leader is of the largest party is going to be asked by the Governor General, the King's representative, to form a government. And so it's very, very similar. And unlike the US system, we're not directly voting for Mark Carney. But it is true that similar to the UK, I think in a lot of cases, the personality of the leader tends to reflect into the local politics. And so even though you're supposed to be voting for who you want to represent, it's hard to ignore the fact that we have three leaders essentially to choose from. And that's going to strongly influence, I think, the way the vote goes as well. And
so just, Moshe, briefly, if you would, just when it comes to the main opposition candidates, how do they test themselves and how do they look like when it comes to Mark Carney? Because we know that we already said he's a smooth talking, he's confident. What about the other two?
So the leader of the NDP party is Jagmeet Singh. He has been leader for some years now. I don't know that he's a credible prime minister. It's just very difficult to be able to form a government that far to the left in Canadian politics. The Liberals are going to be the centrist group of the bunch. Pierre Poilievre is the leader of the Conservative Party. He's been there for some time now. He's a former minister in the previous Conservative government. He will certainly appeal to the base in the Canadian prairie provinces, which tend to lean a little more right. He's going to have to work really hard to win over the the major centers in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. And I think whoever's going to form the next government really needs to win a lot of those ridings to make the numbers add up. I don't know that any of them have necessarily the power to create a majority government. So we could be facing another minority government here where you're being propped up.
Moshi, thanks for being with us on BBC News.